And guys, we are here on Entombed, spawning in the top left location as the blue Terran player, guys. He's currently down 1-0. Can he tie up the series? We'll find out in just a moment. It is Quantix, TheSTC. And his opponent spawning in the bottom left position as the red Terran player. We have none other than Startail Bomber.
TVT on this map is really good for mech. A lot of people really like going for kind of a, an early Hellion drop into mass Hellion play, get quick blue flame, control the map from Marines. Drops still kind of work, but the airspace is a little bit tight, George. So just look how narrow you have to squeeze in.
Yeah, there's really not a lot of
size 2
space.
medevac would not be able to get it, but a size 0 medevac probably could.
Just about, and it's there's not too much room for maneuver there. Like a couple Marines can pick off dropships and Banshees. That's a great point, actually. Just not a lot of room on the edge of the map. Yep. So we might be seeing a little bit less of that, but at the same time, of course, it could end up being a bit counterintuitive. It could catch someone off guard and play it. This time, both of them going for a barracks first opening, so no gas first coming out here on this particular map.
I mean, generally speaking, tanks are very powerful on Tomb Valley. Like, say you take like a little position over here, you can actually cover so much of this concave area, and vice versa. You have tanks that you have double high ground. That means tanks are automatically way better because you have 2 chances to kind of preserve them and really protect them for maximum DPS.
And with the single Zelnaga tower as well, it just so many counter-attacking routes get instantly covered as soon as you have position out in the middle of the map. Yeah, there are still a couple more available to use, but it really restricts the options your opponent has once you get that position solidified.
And I mean, there is still counterattack paths. It is possible to still play bio on this map. It's just a little bit tougher, and that's why Marine Tank is probably the most loosest form. But hypothetically on paper, mech is supposed to beat Marine Tank because Hellions can easily deal with the massive Marines if they kind of clump up and group together. But we'll see what those players are choosing to do. Bomber, of course, doing very similar build to what we did last time. More of a delayed gas, but he can squeeze out a reactor while still getting out command center. That allows him to get Marines out. Doesn't necessarily have to get as much gas compared to his opponent. STC going for another factory, but is he going to go for a Banshee play this time? Looks like he's setting up for a reactor for his factory.
Yeah, looks like it, and there we go. So the reactor is going to complete after the factory finishes, of course, but it's not going to be too delayed there. We have a couple of Marines just going to be poking out to see what's going on there. And in the meantime, both players really just playing very chilled out at the moment, going into the mid-game, not looking like we're set up to do any aggression. I think the STC, if anyone, potentially could be the first to come out with a couple of Hellions there, but he doesn't 100% have to lift the factory. Okay, he's going to do it anyway. In some occasions, we do see the reactor staying on the barracks and just getting a lot of Marines out with a couple of Hellions to reinforce, possibly with a medevac as well, but we don't see that in this particular game.
Nah, I'm pretty sure he's going to go for a medevac as well. I mean, he is going to drop the command center a little bit earlier, so he will delay it, but he's got so much gas. I would be very surprised to see him not go for a starport.
Yeah, and there we go. Yeah, you're absolutely right for it, and that gets dropped down straight away. Right next to the barracks as well, so that barracks is going to drop a tech lab, I suspect, and we are going to see a little bit of Banshee play come out of the STC.
Meanwhile, Bomber, of course, trying to tech up as fast as he can. Again, similar opening to last game, although STC is going to take advantage of, Bomber playing a little bit safer and drop his command center on the low ground. But hypothetically, what if Bomber came at the same time as last game, where you move it with 2 Hellions and a few Marines? I mean, STC really wouldn't have much. So he's kind of making a lot of assumptions under his opponent.
That's a lot of Hellions popping out there, and the STC actually getting a bit supply blocked, but there we go, just about resuming production there. So we have 2 more Hellions on the way, 4, of course, already out on the field, just going to be checking to make sure nothing is going around that left counter-attacking path, and then we're going to see a little bit of an attack coming out of here. But Startail Bomber has a decent spread on his units here, and it looks like he might be okay. A couple of those Hellions from the STC getting very low, very early indeed, and wow, Bomber completely crushing this advance.
Yep, never allowing his Marines to break line formation. And STC does lose a little bit. I mean, in the end, he's only committing minerals for his opponent's minerals. And, he's just trying to set up for an expansion, trying to make him think, am I going to drop? Am I going to do it? And then STC is going for a Viking, so those kinds of two ideas are conflicting, and that's kind of why STC is setting up this mind game.
This is a great position for the STC be in anyway, though, because even though he lost that army initially, he has got those Hellions on the logo. He's going to try and keep it as a soft contained. Bomber looking to move out, though, and he's saying absolutely not. So that good position the STC is in, yes, it's great to be in, but it's not very defensible. And look at that, those Hellions actually clumping up and losing a lot of hit points as well, so he will be forced back. Advantage Bomber.
Look at this. The STC is going to take the notion to expand again. STC now has 2 Vikings out, really wants air superiority, and that's still pointing towards mech. Considering that he hasn't actually gotten a tech lab on his barracks. If he wanted to go for any kind of bio, whether it's Marine tank or Marines at all, he would go for Stim. But STC instead trying to scout his opponent. Bomber hasn't shown any indication otherwise. Both players until now have indicated that they're going to go for mech.
This is a dangerous play coming out of here from the STC. He lost that army initially at the ramp of Bomber, and he's responding by expanding to try and get back into this game. And he's doing a fairly good job of keeping up with his opponent as far as supply goes. But if Bomber gets wind of this happening, Frodan, I wonder if there's a window where he can just simply attack and force a lift or even a cancel at the 3rd base.
Well, Bomber doesn't know about it for now.
No,
instead, he's just poking up. He is getting a tech lab on his barracks, so he's going to try to go for at least some support onto his bio. Bomber doesn't really have an ability to push up, even though the ramp is wide. He has it's really tough because the way the Hellions are concave is that the instant you move up with Marines, it's going to get completely swept.
Oh, the landed Viking from the STC not paying dividends there for Frodan. 2v1 there all of a sudden, and he does have air superiority at the moment. And wow, here we go. Bomber actually landing the 2 Vikings to try and stop those SCVs from getting to the front line. He feels like it is time to get up through. But look at this. Those Hellions actually unable to get too much purchase on the logo, but it's not going to matter. The numbers are in his favor anyway. And are we going to see Bomber just crash through and take victory 2 games in a row?
I don't know. He shouldn't be able to break him here.
I didn't think so as well. Like, the concave wasn't great for him. He had 3 or 4 Hellions in the back, not doing very much as well. And it looks like things are just about going to stabilize here for the STC. But that seemed a lot scarier than it should have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It shouldn't have necessarily done as much damage as that.
Yeah.
But still, I feel like Quantic actually can get away with that because he went for the faster 3rd command center, and so he can toss away some SCVs. He's not going to have as many units, but he will. And now that he's had the availability of 6 gases to take whenever he wants to, his mech's going to be incredibly strong. Now, Bomber ends up not really utilizing his barracks whatsoever, just using it for some add-ons, which is really smart, saves you some time. But he's going for mech as well. And, well, we're in for a long game, Jurusar.
We are indeed. We even have Blue Flame being upgraded from the STC here, so he is looking to get very, very Hellion heavy. And, wow, I wonder how this is going to fare in the long run, especially if Bomber starts investing that much more heavily into siege tanks. We can see the production at the moment. Bomber's producing tanks 2 at a time right now, and the STC is still basically on Hellions. If we take a look at the units out on the field, I mean, this is... I don't really know what these Hellions are going to be able to do against those tanks once Bomber gets a decent position. A couple of Vikings are going to be harassing this 3rd base and actually doing quite a good job of it. So the SCC mining more from his 3rd and mining earlier, but I think Bomber at the moment is transitioning into the better unit composition a little sooner.
Yeah, I mean, unit composition does matter, but there is... okay, like, I don't want to say it... take this advice with a grain of salt, Jurusar.
Yeah.
There is such thing as too much tanks in mech DVT. You don't want to over-tank. You want some Vikings mixed into it to grab air control. You want some Hellions to grab space control. If you just go pure tank, well, first of all, 1 Banshee will wreck you. Second of all, you lose an incredible amount of mobility, even though you do have a lot of confrontation power. If your opponent is smart, then they never have to do that. Now, that said, vision over the air is super important because we see some players like Tasia incorporate some Banshees with their Vikings. That way, if they ever win the air battle, they can pick off tanks here and there. So, you know, having support for the tanks, I feel like, is just as important as having tanks itself.
No, that's a great point, especially with that air superiority as well. So I just need to be a little bit... imagine if you accidentally move those Hellions into a couple of siege-stop tanks. You do not want that to happen, but it looks like the STC is going in, once again, trying to stop this 3rd base from getting up and mining, and he's doing a good job of denying that so far. A lot of SCVs clumped up, but he's forced to engage.
This is awesome for Bomber, though, Jorasar. Like, he's now trapped a lot of the Hellions. They haven't gotten a lot of return. And this is a lot of minerals. It costs a significant amount. Imagine all those were command centers.
Yeah, there was that huge bunch of SCVs and mules, Frodan. They were all clumped up between the natural and the third, and the STC had to engage the army of Bomber there. He could have spent one hit of that blue flame and destroyed that entire bunch of SCVs, but he didn't get around to doing it, and as a result, that basically ended up being a bit of an army trade that favored Bomber, and the SCC didn't get the economic damage in that he otherwise would have wanted to.
Yep, you're absolutely right, and that's what gives Bomber kind of an equalization effect, because you say, well, shouldn't SEC be behind? No, he had the third command center, so he does have those extra minerals.
Yep,
it's just that they're no longer in the army. The investment hasn't been paid off. So they're actually kind of equalized now regarding, especially their expansion timings. Bomber's not terribly far behind. And as this game progresses, it becomes harder and harder to attack into your opponent. That was the window which you can kind of harass a lot freely because your opponent doesn't have too many tanks that cover every area.
Yep, for sure.
Now it's going to be like, well, how do I ever break past this army? It's too big.
No, that's a great point, actually. And another thing that we didn't touch on earlier, but it's important now, is that Bomber's already finished +1. And Quantic, the STC, hasn't actually, like, it's, what is it, around halfway at the moment? So we might just see a very simple position where both sides are sieged up, and, you know, they have the opportunity to catch up in upgrades, but Bomber's going to be able to take that map position first, and that's pretty significant for him.
Really like this barracks position from STC to kind of catch the wind of some units in the middle. It's a trick in ZVT as well, or ZV anything. You can get a nice spot. But more importantly, look at the position that Bomber wants to take with the sensor tower, strategically positioned all across this entire ridge to make sure to track any movements.
And a little bit of a counterattack at the 4th, just double checking to see how many SCVs are there, and it looks like everything's going to be okay, and it will become an orbital command as planned, but the SCC does have that hit squad of Hellions moving out across the middle of the map now, and he's just going to go around the sensor tower and see what damage he can do a little bit later. He's rejoining at home, but that's a good little avenue of attack for him later. And oh, we are going to see a big engagement on the right-hand side of the map. The SCC actually moving just behind. He doesn't know that Bomber has those Hellions in there.
Oh, Bomber keeping them hidden, and of course, we know that Bomber knows about the flank possibilities. The tanks are not sieged. Bomber does attract 3 of the tanks. STC going to completely circumvent it and go towards the 4th base. What is Bomber going to do? If he packs up and goes home, he's going to be very far behind. But instead, he packs up and re-sieges because he knows that there's another tank line here. This is excellently played by STC, and he's able to capitalize on position.
Oh, this is so difficult from Bomber. The STC saw that Bomber had sieged up early on and said, okay, you've sieged up, I see your position now, you even have the sensor tower there. I'm not going to try and challenge your position. I'm going to go directly around it and see what you can do. And it's so difficult because the STC has units on either side, and it looks like he's moving in from both flanks at the moment. Thors and siege tanks in every direction here from Bomber. The tank's a little bit late on the left-hand side from the STC. Is Bomber going to hold in the middle? Just a couple of siege tanks left, and the STC actually moves back for a bit, but I thought he did a decent job of breaking that position. Looks like both sides are going to reset. The supplies are so close. They're around 145, and I think the STC didn't fare quite as well out of that engagement, Frodan, because he originally had armies both above and below the center of the map, and now it feels like he only has them in one location.
Yeah, and you know, as great as it is to have siege tanks unsieged and targeting down some of those units when you have Hellions to buffer, these Thors are crazy. Look how much DPS. It's 72 damage per shot. If you can get them isolating the tanks, it's basically 2 shots, and then, you know, 1 tank can clean up the rest.
For sure.
These 2 Thors did massive amount of damage, and they were pretty well cushioned. So overall, Bomber picked a nice spot. He controlled the tower. Vision was on his side, and STC just could not push any further because of the restriction of vision. Although one thing that's going into his favor is that he does have 5 bases with gases pushing or firing on all cylinders, and that's going to allow him to remax much quicker if he keeps trading like the way he did.
No, that's a great point, actually. The STC might be able to reach a point later on in the game where he can continuously exchange with Bomber. He's going to be poking with a couple of Hellions now, but they are getting picked apart pretty quickly indeed. It looks like he'll get a couple of SCV kills, but nothing that's absolutely extraordinary at this point in time. As long as those units from Bomber clean them up, yes, they do. So those Hellions got a few kills, but not too many. I mean, Bomber's still on 64 SCVs. He will be able to remake a couple of them, but not too really not too worried at this point. What he does have to worry about, though, is another massive counterattack from the STC. Look at the number of tanks there, Frodan.
Yeah, there's about 14 tanks here. That is 14 out of 22. STC cannot be careless with it, because remember, he can get flanked too. The escape path from STC is very linear. Look at that, the one Banshee. We were talking about this.
Oh, dear.
Just send one Banshee and you can pick off the tanks, and that's going to force him into the awkward position. Bomber can kind of use this to completely pick apart the army of STC, but he's going to charge down the center, realizing, well, you know, I'm not going to save those tanks. I better take this opportunity to siege the middle.
Oh, these battles are happening all over the place at the moment. Bomber, though, able to clean up the STC in the bottom right, but the STC regaining control of the middle of the map. They're going to be sending in a couple more Hellions, and this time against the fourth base of Bomber will find it unopposed for now, so you'll be able to pick apart a couple of those SCVs. The tanks are here now, though, and whoa, look at that mule drop. Wow, imagine if he did that a second earlier. Fortunately, though, all the mules survive, and Bomber will be able to continue mining. That's a lot of minerals that could have been lost.
Yep. Again, Bomber just doing a good job harassing. Just like you said, he could have lost way more, but, you know, STC still has a lot of SCVs. You might say, well, the army's or supplies are kind of similar, but Bomber actually has more because of that worker difference. It's starting to borderline a little bit excessive. He was in the low, mid-80s, but, you know, you don't need that much, especially with 5 command centers and more building. You need to start lowering it at least to the 60s.
Yeah, I think so. You've got those mules from the orbital commands coming down anyway, so you want to be able to free up that supply for a larger army and let the mules do the brunt of the work. That many SCVs is not going to fare him well going into the late game. Both players now, though, have expanded to the right-hand side of the map, as Bomber looking like he wants to take apart the 3rd/4th locations here. So much going on. Hellion run by into the 4th base of Bomber as well from the STC, but Bomber making a significant progress here, actually splitting apart the 3rd and 4th bases.
Yeah, the Hellions harass is very effective at the 4th base, but Bomber, he's trying to get into a good spot, but he doesn't have much buffering. This is where the Hellions are supposed to come in to soak up damage, and Bomber may have overextended just a little bit for this army. That was a very costly army. He lost several Thors on top of his tanks. Now, Bomber does have some resources banked, and he does have a good number of bases, but overall, his positioning is not that powerful. The Thors can easily deal with the Banshees. Look at that, it's almost instantly killed, and STC has a very big window where he can control the center, and from there, lay a lot of siege attacks.
Now, I do believe, if you may want to double check, but I think the STC is currently on 2-1 upgrades, and Bomber has already got +3, but doesn't have armor upgrades, I think, on his mech unit. Yeah, okay, so that is the case. Bomber, though, already transitioning into battle cruisers, Frodan, so we're going to be seeing some interesting shenanigans going later into the game. What is the siege tank count like after that engagement? The STC is ahead 12-8.
14-8 now. And I've always like, actually, we'll hold that thought. Quantic STC feeling generous, wants to donate some tanks. Says, you know what? Who needs tanks at all?
Wow.
Oh, STC did not need to do that.
Oh, that was not good, unfortunately.
No, he had the right idea. He controlled the center. He could try to pressure off the expansions and then get a gas advantage. But, I mean, there's enough tanks with +3 that you can't really push into that way unless you want to donate some units, unless you have good air control. But that was STC getting a little bit too over-eager. And that's actually going to give Bomber his ticket to getting air upgrades or air units pretty safely, because if you go for a mass air switch, you need that tank support on the ground, because how are you supposed to defend against a huge siege? It's kind of, I think of it the same as getting Broodlords, right? Before you can get that, you get timed, and then there's nothing you can do to stop it. So now Bomber has a nice one-way ticket to having mass air Terran, Sky Terran, and I think STC has to also think about switching sometime soon.
And I'm just worried that this decision might end up coming too late. The STC has got 6 siege tanks at a time producing for it, and that is a lot of stuff. But we do have those battlecruiser upgrades and Yamato cannon on the way as well. If you actually get something like 6 battlecruisers against 12 siege tanks before they can run away, you Yamato off 6 of them, that could end up being painful. And the STC does see the battlecruisers, these Hellions, into the 3rd base, doing a significant amount of damage, but the battlecruisers will be able to clean them up. Bomber, though, keeping that SCV count high. He's still in the high 60s at the moment, so it should be just about okay.
Yeah.
And he now knows that the Sky Terran switch is on the way. STC immediately going into triple Thor plus a Viking.
Yeah, he's adding on his mass starports, but he's very behind in time. Oh, look at this amount of damage. These tanks are able to fire down on all of the SCVs, and that's going to pressure Bomber to say, well, I have to kind of move these battle cruisers away and really try to, you know, shut down the harass. One thing that you have to be very mindful is of battle cruisers. Wow, command center just dropped. Battlecruisers don't have great mobility, so STC has the right idea, forcing his opponent in multiple directions.
And these SCVs are going to be scoring a small victory for Bomber by the looks of things, slowly picking apart these siege tanks. We're not going to unsiege and try and pick them apart. It looks like, wow, talk about the workers uprising, man. They're unionized, those guys. You don't want to mess with them.
Oh, STC, is he prepared for this air switch? He has a lot of tanks, and Bomber just has too much in the air right now. I mean, even if he tried to contend for it, he wouldn't be able to do much. Now, battlecruisers are coming out, and they do have +3, which helps a lot with this with the clumped up battlecruisers. And the way to really defend against that is you want to get +3 armor to cut down on the DPS significantly. It's 4 damage per shot on the Thor that's reduced. Bomber is continuing to make tanks, though. You don't want to lose too much on the ground, but overall, there's nothing really that STC can do to control the center until he gets way more Vikings, 6 at a time.
Yeah, and that's certainly a good way to do it. I mean, those starports are going to be working overtime right now for it, as we're basically going to transition into Sky Terran versus Sky Terran very shortly. Now, we have got 2-2 already on the way for air upgrades from Bomber. Obviously, he transitioned into those battle cruisers a lot earlier than the STC was prepared for. The STC, though, he did take bases earlier. He has taken more of the right-hand side of his half of the map than Bomber has. So he might be able just to get numbers on his side, and he really needs to do that at the moment because Bombers, I mean, those battlecruisers are really resilient.
Yes, you know, the battlecruisers are pretty resilient if they can get the armor up. They do have 4 armor, which is very nice, especially against the Vikings, which is 2 shots or 2 volleys per shot. STC is also under a very terrible position where his Thors can't add too much, but now Bomber is moving forward.
Oh my god, the Thors on the Vikings, Frodan. That is huge from the STC.
Yeah, but he's got Yamato cannons and he's shooting at all the Thors. The anti-air for STC is dropping significantly. Look at that. Bomber was down in supply, but it's the quality of supply. Now Bomber can take out the tanks, and STC has to worry, well, even if I take care of this air threat, do I have enough to handle the siege tanks on the ground?
And this is such a difficult position to be in. The STC, though, he is constantly producing, I mean, the Yamato cannons are going to disappear after a while, and he is getting Vikings 7 at a time. This isn't something Bomber can continue with the battlecruisers indefinitely. They take so unbelievably long to build. The question is how much damage he can get done on the ground. In the meantime, in the 4th base of the STC, actually, I think Bomber has a couple of units there, so Hellions picking apart that base entirely. The battlecruisers are still going strong, actually, but the next round of Vikings from the STC should just about stabilize. Like you said, the question is, how far have the tanks advanced with Bomber, and can he stay there?
Bomber doesn't necessarily have that many reinforcements coming in. You know, I figured that he would be able to keep a strong rally point, but he's actually keeping everything, you know, mostly to Vikings and tanks, as well as some Hellion support. He's transitioning back into a strong ground army. Just like you said, didn't have enough to really keep battlecruisers because you need kind of like an immediate result. Bomber's sort of breaking through. This is like enough to be annoying because STC hasn't ever had the opportunity of really building up an air army. Every Viking that drops is just going to make Bomber that much more resilient later on.
The difficult thing really for Bomber was that he can't exactly remake and march his battlecruisers across the map instantaneously. So they were really, really strong, but the STC had so much production as far as his Vikings were concerned that he could just keep rallying out and trying to whistle Bomber down. If we let's take a quick look at the income and see, yeah, the STC is mining a decent amount more than Bomber at the moment, mainly because Bomber hasn't taken his bottom right base. So if they just keep trading blow for blow like this, the STC, I feel like he's going to be okay, actually.
Maybe. I mean,
it's tough. Either player could really throw away a whole bunch of tanks, and we could have ridiculous positioning for, you know, both ways in a TVT. But
it's still hard to say because upgrades matter so much. You see those 3 Vikings take on 5 Vikings just like that, and the Vikings survive. Oh, this is a big play from the STC, though. He needs to keep doing stuff like this, but at the same time, a big run by in the top right. Both players trying to trade out their workers. At this stage of the game, it's kind of okay to trade out, but when you lose this much, Bomber can't keep afford to run on such a low econ anymore because, I mean, he doesn't even have SCVs mining gas.
Yeah, okay, his economy was lower than the STC, which all right, he's a base down, that's okay. But then the STC was continuously trading as well, and now we're in a position where Bomber really does actually need to grab that base, but the STC has good positioning on his tanks. We see that bottom right expansion that Bomber has taken is completely sieged up at the moment, and he's in a little bit of a pickle because he's also down in supply. He's 40 supply down right now. This battlecruiser will be able to chase the tanks away, but a lot of damage has been done here. It's very difficult for Bomber to get back on level pegging, because what he needs to do first is make up the lost supply, and upgrades will be able to play a part here, but with that big a difference, it's going to be a little bit tough.
Yes, it's going to be tough if STC has enough anti-air to deal with 3 battle cruisers and the Vikings. He does have 12. He doesn't have any Thors to add any splash, but he's making so many Vikings at once.
That's
7 Vikings, and this is a classic case of, well, does he just have way too many units? It doesn't even matter how many upgrades you have. The fact that you might have battle cruisers, I just have too much of a macro advantage. He's got 3 bases over his opponent, basically.
I feel like that's where that base advantage that the STC had earlier sort of came in. He used that to try and power out as many Vikings as he could, and the Bomber had great positioning with his battle cruisers, but the STC just continuously making them 7 at a time, whittling him down, and that seems to have paid dividends at this point. He is resuming mining in the top right, does go up and clean up that heli. Bomber has now taken the central base, which is an interesting location to take. It could potentially be susceptible here. The STC, one attack, just annoying the heck out of Bomber, but he is at 200 supply to 155. Bomber is slowly getting back up there.
It's a little bit deceiving, Jorsar, because Bomber's worker supply is not that high. If you look at the just raw army difference, it's not that big.
That's
and
true,
battle cruisers do come into play. You have to be very mindful, and also positioning matters so much. TVT is just as much about positioning as it's about composition. Bomber, here we go. He's got Yamato cannons. Maybe he can make something happen. Try and see if he can hit those kiting Vikings, and he does. Big explosions, but there's no AoE. Look at the kiting as the Vikings are able to whittle down those numbers. STC going for a massive victory parade down the center of the map. His supply is still holding strong. Bomber not able to catch it. In fact, Bomber is resilient on keeping this expansion while giving up the others.
Yeah, here's the problem. We have 9 Vikings on the way now as well at a time for the STC. Bomber manages to win that air battle, but look at this ground army completely demolishing the bottom right. Bomber going for a counterattack. He's sending his army into the 3rd base location. A couple of siege tanks will prevent him for a couple of seconds moving in, but this is... I mean, this really is a boxing match. Both players just going at it hammer and tongs here, Frodan.
I think Bomber's found a nice little groove, though. If he can do enough damage and take a good positioning, the battlecruiser should be able to whittle down the tank numbers. Look at that! STC being a little bit indecisive, losing a lot of units, and that's going to cost him dearly because he had a big tank advantage, 20-9. Now it's not so big, 9-12.
Bomber has a, it has to be said, Bomber does have a really nice air advantage at the moment, 10-5 Vikings.
This one battlecruiser has done so much damage, Jorsar.
The STC needs to get Vikings out. I mean, his production is capable of doing it, and here we go. Finally, they're moving out here. He might be able to whittle down these Vikings from Bomber because they are at about half health, but Bomber just holding on to that air superiority by the skin of his teeth, and while he's doing that, Frodan, that one battlecruiser, like you said, is just bringing the goods home.
No, that's exactly what I was talking about, man. This is, even though STC has the large army advantage, or on paper he had a big supply advantage, Bomber was able to pick a nice position. He let STC say, well, this base is not as worth as much as this spot next to your expansions. If you move too far out, it doesn't matter if I don't necessarily control the air directly. How can you move down your ramp?
This is this has been an awfully long and pretty crazy game so far. Bomber with another Yamato cannon. He's going to be able to take out one of those Vikings, but that battlecruiser does finally go down. And it looks like the STC, has he regained air superiority? His Vikings seem to be completely fine. 7-2 now. He's still holding a 40 supply advantage over Bomber, but like you said, Ferdinand, Bomber's positioning has been pretty darn good.
Now, STC still has a very significant bank. He's remaking units very quickly as he's squeezing out 6 tanks at a time. Good lord, he's got a lot of factories going on. Another Viking drop, and it's going to really annoy and harass Bomber. Bomber's been playing this pretty lean, but he can't keep affording to lose any more workers. He's now down to just the mid-20s. That is not going to help him at all. He needs to start remaking SCVs. He is. 6 SCVs are in production.
And the STC, it feels like for the last last while, actually, he's been trying to limit the mining of Bomber. We saw that great tank move out there, but never mind, he's actually moving down his ramp into a whole bunch of sieged tanks here. And that can't be that cost efficient, but he does have numbers on his side. He is just going to completely plow through, actually. He's taking a lot of losses, though.
Bomber can't really keep up with just the raw macro of STC. Way too many bases. He's down 4 bases. That's just way too much of a deficit. Bomber holding on for as long as he can, but in the end, his air switch was not enough. He only had, what, 3 battle cruisers at most? GG.
And the STC takes game number 2.
Incredible game. I like
really
that.
Was.
I think Bomber, if he was able to secure any one of those bottom right bases and get more gas, then he'd be able to have a stronger air transition, get some Ravens, PDD, be able to get that strong surprise, right? Because the whole point is, you know, maybe you're a little bit behind in air, but when you realize that your starports are behind, your upgrades are behind, your tech's behind, because, you know, the Terran gets a couple of point defense drones, maybe secret missiles, then you really can't do anything because you just get caught out of position. And
there were a couple of great engagements there for Bomber as well, but ultimately we saw going towards that late game there from the STC that it almost felt like his strategy a little bit was to limit the mining of Bomber. We saw a couple of those tanks move down that beautiful siege across the cavern towards that planetary fortress and stuff like that, and that Bomber didn't take that bottom right base for quite a long time. The STC was able to use that extra money to get those 7 Vikings out at a time, to get those 6 tanks out at a time when he wanted to. So even when Bomber came in with those nice engagements, the STC was just able to continuously remax that much faster. And it looks like that ended up making the difference at the end of the game.
That's right. I'm trying to set up the next game, making sure that we always have everything going on.
Excellent. So guys, I believe we're going to be going into a very quick commercial break before popping into game number 3. So don't go anywhere. Game 3 between the STC and Bomber coming up straight after this break.